In the year 400, Christ showed St. Patrick the entrance to Purgatory on a rainy night on the 21st of August, 1879. Our Lady showed the people of Ireland the way out. 1 million Irish died in the plague. One faithful priest offered 100 consecutive masses for them. 7 days later, on the night of the apparition, communist forces that hated him hired assassins to kill him. Instead, they were going to cut off his ears. Our Lady in heaven intervened. They appeared in this small Irish hamlet and changed everything. This is Knock. I had begun to learn about Knock and its connection to Purgatory, but I needed a sign. And then one day a viewer sent me a mass card that they had sent me from Knock, and this planted the seed. But how was I going to convince my wife? As I ordered book after Knock and I learned more about its history, I formulated a plan to make this trip a reality. I realized that if we took 2 separate flights, one to New York and one from New York to Dublin, we could make the cost of the trip significantly cheaper. As Providence would have it, we had a 6-hour layover in New York, just enough time to visit the majestic Cathedral of St. Patrick to ask for his blessing, and after paying the insanely expensive $100 taxi ride into New York City, we landed at St. Patrick's Cathedral with all of our bags. In my childhood, we had lived in New York for 4 years, so it is a city that is quite familiar to me. At St. Patrick's, we were not only able to get the great Irish apostle's blessing, we were also able to attend Mass, but only after a typical New York hot dog. Blessed and fed by both hot dogs and the Eucharist, we were ready to continue on our journey. 6 hours later, we arrived in Dublin, and after 1 awkward hour of driving on the left side of the road, we were on our way to Knock. Here is its story. Ever since England turned away from the Catholic faith, they have unfortunately significantly persecuted the Irish people, both for their different culture, but also and perhaps mostly for their Catholic faith. This took place most intensely during the 1840s, specifically 1847, or what was known as Black 47, when a severe plague hit the potato crop. The English had for the most part become landlords of the Irish farmlands and charged incredibly expensive rent to the poor Irish farmers. In order to make the most of the small land that they would rent, the Irish decided to farm the potato because it yielded much fruit and was also highly nutritious, so much so that the Irish young men were typically healthier and stronger than your average British person. This single crop farming was of benefit to the Irish until the plague came and completely wiped out the crop. People, families, and whole villages began to starve as there was no food. As they became unable to pay their rent, they would be kicked off their lands and have no way to sustain themselves. There was actually food available in the country, but the English government would do one of two things. They would either export the food in order to make more money, or they would ask the Irish to renounce their faith and heritage in order to be fed. O'Hagans and O'Donnells would have to become Hagans or O'Donnells, as well as Protestant. Some recanted their faith in order to eat, others simply did not. Their faith was all that they had, and they weren't going to give it up. The south of Ireland was not as badly hit because there were industrial jobs available to them. The hardest hit area was the northwest in counties such as Mayo, where the apparition was to happen some years later. Over 1 million Irish died, and more accurately were murdered, in what can be called an Irish Holocaust. Whole villages and towns and families were wiped out. Their survivors would also leave the country to England or to the United States. A total of 2 million Irish either died or left in the island country of 5 to 6 million people at the time. Most of these people who died were buried in mass, unmarked graves, to where even to this day it is difficult to find where they are buried. It's almost as these people have been forgotten. In reflecting on this story, the Irish were very much like one of their iconic animals, sheep silently being led to the slaughter. Herein comes a priest, Archdeacon Kavanagh. He was a priest with the then used title of Archdeacon. He served some years in Westport, one of the worst hit areas of Northwest Ireland. He had a profound love for 3 things: the poor and suffering, the souls in purgatory, and Our Lady. His devotion was known from early on, especially in his service to those affected by the famine. He was a type of person and actually did sell nearly all his belongings only to be able to provide something to the people around him who were starving. He was then named parish priest of Knock, a post that he would hold for nearly 30 years. Knock was a very small village at the time out in the country that mostly consisted of farmers. The people were extremely poor and could barely support having a local priest. Despite that, some 30 years after the Great Famine, God inspired him to offer 100 consecutive masses for those that had died, the souls in purgatory. Many of those that had died unprepared and perhaps even without a proper Christian burial. At the time, a second famine had actually hit the country, but more resistance happened towards the British, and so much fewer people died. Part of this resistance was violent and partially infiltrated by the communism that had begun growing in Italy. They wanted to take advantage of the anger of the Irish people. Kavanaugh preached against this and so began forming enemies among them, so much so that they hired assassins to kill him. However, the assassins were partial to Kavanaugh and decided to only cut off his ears. He finished the 100 masses, and 7 days later was on the night that he was going to be attacked. It was on this very night that Our Lady intervened. It happened to be August 21st, 1879, the vigil of the Queenship of Mary. As it does much in that part of Ireland, it was raining that night. At around 8 p.m., when it begins to get dark, a bright light shone on the back gable wall of St. John the Baptist Church. Some years earlier, the previous pastor had prophesied that this little country church would one day be a house of prayer for all nations. Various villagers for different periods of time, 33 total, however, only 15 came forward as official witnesses. They all saw heaven appear in this most majestic apparition. Although considered a Marian apparition, it is more accurately a heavenly apparition. The witnesses were all different ages. Some stayed for 2 hours, others for a much shorter amount of time. Because of the rain and the most likely cooler weather, not all of them were able to stay the entire time. They also didn't know how long the vision would last, so some would leave and go get others and come back, and then it was gone. Some saw it extremely close, others from far away. One person that they went to go get was Archdeacon Kavanaugh to come see what was happening at the church, but most likely at the time, after a long day of serving his community on horseback, he dismissed what they said and wasn't able to come see it, something that he later regretted for his entire life. However, the story goes that Our Lady appeared to him very often in his cottage, which was a 5-minute walk to the church, and she appeared to him specifically 1 year before he died, to tell him to cease regretting the past and that he was a good and faithful priest. That last year of his life was consequently filled with intense peace. The most stunning description of the apparition was given by the then 14-year-old Patrick Hill. Hear him in his own words. I'm Patrick Hill. I live in Claremorris. My aunt lives at Knock. I remember the 21st August last. On that day I was drawing home turf or peat from the bog on an ass. While at my aunt's at about 8 o'clock in the evening, Dominic Byrne came into the house. He cried out, "Come up to the chapel and see the miraculous lights and the beautiful visions that are to be seen there." I followed him, another man by the name Dominic Byrne, and John Durkin, and a small boy named John Curry came with me. We were all together. We ran over to the chapel. When we, running southwest, came so far from the village that on our turning the gable came into view, we immediately beheld the lights, a clear white light covering most of the gable, from the ground up to the window and higher. It was a kind of changing bright light, going sometimes up high and again not so high. We saw the figures, the Blessed Virgin, St. Joseph, and St. John, and an altar with a lamb on the altar and a cross behind the lamb. At this time we reached as far as the wall fronting the gable. There were other people there before me. Some of them were praying, some not. All were looking at the vision. They were leaning over the wall or ditch with their arms resting on the top. I saw the figures in brightness. The boy, John Curry, from behind the wall could not see them, but I did. He asked me to lift him up till he could see the grandbabies, as he called the figures. It was raining. Some amongst them, Mary McLaughlin, who beheld what I now saw, had gone away. Others were coming. After we prayed a while, I thought it right to go across the wall and into the chapel yard. I brought little Curry with me. I went then up closer. I saw everything distinctly. The figures were full and round as if they had a body and life. They said nothing. But as we approached, they seemed to go back a little towards the gable. I distinctly beheld the Blessed Virgin Mary, life-size, standing about 2 feet or so above the ground, clothed in white robes, which were fastened at the neck. Her hands were raised to the height of the shoulders as if in prayer, with the palms facing one another, but slanting inwards towards the face. The palms were not turned towards the people, but facing each other as I have described. She appeared to be praying. Her eyes were turned, as I saw, towards heaven.
She wore a brilliant crown on her head, and over the forehead, with a crown, fitted the brow, a beautiful rose. The crown appeared brilliant and of a golden brightness, of a deeper hue inclined to a mellow yellow than the striking whiteness of the robes she wore. The upper parts of the crown appeared to be a series of sparkles or glittering crosses. I saw her eyes, the balls, the pupils, and the iris of each. I noticed her hands especially and face, her appearance. The robes came only as far as the ankles. I saw the feet and the ankles. One foot, the right, was slightly in advance of the other. At times she appeared, and all the figures appeared to move out and again to go backwards. I saw them move. She did not speak. I went up very near. One old woman went up and embraced the Virgin's feet, and she found nothing in her arms or hands. They receded. She said from her. I saw St. Joseph to the Blessed Virgin's right hand. His head was bent from the shoulders forward. He appeared to be paying his respects. I noticed his whiskers. They appeared slightly gray. There was a line or dark mirroring between the figure of the Blessed Virgin and the spot where he stood. I saw the feet of St. Joseph too. His hands were joined like a person at prayer. The third figure that stood before me was that of St. John the Evangelist. He stood erect at the gospel side of the altar, at an angle with the figure of the Blessed Virgin, so that his back was not turned to the altar nor to the Mother of God. His right arm was at an angle with a line drawn across from St. Joseph to where Our Blessed Lady appeared to be standing. St. John was dressed like a bishop preaching. He wore a small mitre on his head. He held a mass book or a book of Gospels in his left hand. The right hand was raised to the elevation of the head. While he kept the index finger and the middle finger of the right hand raised, the other three fingers of the same hand were shut. He appeared as if he were preaching, but I heard no voice. I came so near that I looked into the book. I saw the lines and the letters. St. John wore no sandals. His left hand was turned towards the altar that were behind him. The altar was a plain one, like any ordinary altar, without any ornaments. On the altar stood a lamb, the size of a lamb, 8 weeks old. The face of the lamb was fronting the west and looking in the direction of the Blessed Virgin and St. Joseph. Behind the lamb, a large cross was placed erect or perpendicular on the altar. Around the lamb, I saw angels hovering during the whole time, for the space of 1 hour and a half or longer. I saw their wings fluttering, but I did not perceive their heads or faces, which were not turned toward me. For the space of 1 hour and a half, we were under the pouring rain. At this time I was very wet. I noticed that the rain did not wet the figures which appeared before me, although I was wet myself. I went away then.
The 15 official witnesses were ordinary people of all different ages. Many of them were related and still have relatives in the town of Knock. Several are buried in marked graves in the nearby cemetery. They serve as testimony that God calls ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Despite none of them being canonized, it is known that many of them went on to live holy lives. The meaning of Knock is varied. Because it was completely silent, it is interpreted in various ways. Here are a few. First, it was a great consolation to the people of Ireland that God was with them and heard them and saw their suffering and honored their faithfulness to them. The central meaning of the vision is a reality of purgatory, that God heard the prayers of this faithful priest and that these 1 million souls who had died were now in heaven and were powerfully interceding for Ireland and for the world. This reality ties all of the meanings together. It is a profound encouragement to all those who pray for the souls in purgatory, that this is a real aspect of our faith and that it is something that we must never forget. In fact, when you search up the story of Knock, the 100 masses offered for the souls in purgatory is often not mentioned or only mentioned once. Here I want to share with you some of my experiences with purgatory during this trip, but before I do that, I want to share one final meaning of the vision. Jesus appeared in the vision as a sacrificial lamb, a symbol that not only has meaning in our faith, but also extreme symbolism in the Irish experience. It's one of the most iconic animals of the country and precisely what those 1 million souls were, sheep led to the slaughter. But their deaths were not in vain. Jesus appearing as one of them invites all of those who suffer to not only suffer with him, but into a mystical wedding, a mystical marriage with him in heaven. This is a most profound calling of our faith. The angels surround him like witnesses at a wedding. To his right, he offers a promise to those that say yes to his invitation, that he will transform our lowly earthly bodies to become glorious heavenly saints in the image of St. Joseph, Our Lady, and St. John. These are the three prototypes that he wants us to be, and he gives us these saints as if to say, I will make you as glorious as them if you accept my offer. And this offer of love is given not only to the people of Ireland, but to the whole world. This is in fact what it means to be Catholic. The principal way to say to Jesus, yes, is in our hearts, but even more profoundly at every single Catholic Mass. While in Ireland, Purgatory came alive in a way that I did not expect. I knew when I encountered it that this was the reason why I was here and why I was called to make this video. Sabrina O'Hagan, our wee Irish friend, guided us throughout the whole week, and she made connections that were very much led by the Holy Spirit. She helped us to meet the Holy Souls Crusade, this crusade that was started some years ago by a man named Aidan Bond. Yes, he's related to James Bond, who after much suffering in his childhood began receiving the gift of seeing the souls in purgatory. He struggled to embrace this gift, as anyone would, and as he grew and matured, began developing. He quickly realized that he could not help them on his own and began drawing to himself people with a similar passion and devotion. Overcoming many obstacles, he began sensing a call from Our Lady to develop this Holy Souls Crusade as a central aspect to the Shrine of Knock, since its story is so intertwined with Purgatory. In fact, he desires to have Knock become a worldwide oratory for the souls in Purgatory, so that whenever anyone dies, they know that they are being prayed for 24 hours a day. He shared some of his amazing stories and encounters with the souls in Purgatory, asking for prayers and, more importantly, them revealing their deliverance. All of this grew his passion for this significantly, and especially his desire for these prayer groups for the Holy Souls to spread all over the world. Listening to this idea, the question arises, why hasn't this already been established all over the world? It's not only a great idea, but something sorely needed in our church today. Intimately intertwined with the crusade and the story of Knock is the aspect of healing. Knock, as much as any Marian shrine, is a powerful center of healing, both spiritual and physical. In fact, in the early years of Knock, an estimated 10% of the people that went there were healed, a number similar to Lourdes at the time. Archdeacon Kavanagh, along with his priestly duties, became a significant witness to this. He wrote down countless healings. I have over 120 pages worth of these documents. For your inspiration, here's just one. Deafness and violent pain in the ear. On the 31st of August, 1879, 10 days after the apparition, a girl aged 12 years was cured while attending Mass at Knock. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. P.J. Gordon of Clare Morris, attested that Delia had suffered intensely all her life from deafness and violent pains in her left ear. Several times each week they had to get up in the night to try and relieve the awful pain by various remedies. They took her on pilgrimage to Knock. While attending Mass there, the pain attacked Delia so badly that she began to cry, and Mrs. Gordon had to bring her outside, where they knelt in prayer before the place where the apparition was seen. Mrs. Gordon picked out a piece of cement from the gable, made the sign of the cross over it, and placed it in the afflicted ear. Almost immediately the pain completely disappeared, never to return, and no trace of deafness remained. Her general health improved rapidly, and in a very short time she became the picture of health and strength. An amazing aspect of the healings is how they took place. Most, if not all, of the early healings took place by people taking small pieces of the brick or mortar of the gable wall and either blessing themselves with it or ingesting it in some way. Not only did ordinary people do this, but priests and even some important bishops at the time. The healings are incredible, of all types, no matter the intensity or difficulty of the illness. The shrine still incorporates this aspect of healing to this day in several ways, through anointing of the sick, reconciliation, as well as by preserving a small part of the wall of the original gable wall for all to pray with. Every single pilgrim, me included, stop at the wall to ask for blessings and healing. It is amazing how God takes the humble instruments of this earth to do amazing things. My wife and I experienced powerful healing at the shrine. She experienced, through the prayer of Adrian Bond, a healing of this heavy blanket of negativity that she has struggled with to overcome over the last few years. My healing was more subtle. I felt like I had restored to me a more intense joy that I had in my previous years, but had muted for various reasons. Both of us experienced the power of Knock through the shrine, but also through the amazing love of the people. How is Knock different? I've been to Guadalupe in Mexico City, the Shrine of the Miraculous Medal, Fatima in Portugal, Lourdes in France, Medjugorje, the Marian Shrine of Valankani in India, and now the Shrine of Knock in Ireland. All of these are places where you experience the love of Our Lady and all the love of God through the people that are there. All have the sacraments, healing prayer, and much love to experience. Like children, you can't say that one is better than another, but at the Shrine of Knock, it is truly the only Marian shrine started by Purgatory. You can feel it in its history, in the history of Ireland, and in a way, theirs is a particular love for the holy souls by the faithful of Ireland. On top of this, in ways I will only know in heaven. I saw the intercession of the holy souls for my wife and I the entire time that we were there. Just as the Irish people and this Marian shrine, the holy souls are often overlooked and forgotten. Jesus and Our Lady do not want this. Adrian spoke it quite clearly when he said that the central message of Knock is purgatory, and that she, Our Lady, desires Knock to be a worldwide oratory for the holy souls in purgatory. This is my belief and desire as well.